Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about none other than the UConn Huskies, and in particular, the draft picks that they're going to have for this year's upcoming NBA draft. The draft takes place in about a couple weeks from now, and we're going to discuss the pros and cons of the four players that are likely to go in the draft, that be it Castle, Clingan, Newton, and Spencer. We're going to discuss the pros and cons of each of them, and which ones I think might be a little overvalued, and which ones I think might be a little undervalued. Let's go. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is Castle. I believe Castle is projected to go somewhere in the top 10 or so of the draft. And one of the big reasons why is because he's probably the most versatile of these players as far as an athlete goes. He's clearly guarding the best player for Purdue, their point guard, and making sure that he's unable to score. And he was pretty effective throughout the whole game, even getting clipped on the screen. He's got good speed, good recovery, and overall is a very solid athlete that is going to be able to compete with the NBA athletes for sure. However, he has one big issue that I think is going to be the main detractor and why I personally think he should be lower in the draft, and that's his shooting ability. Albeit he is the youngest of these four players, that certainly gives him more time to grow, but as of right now, he's like a 27% shooter in college as a three-point line, which probably means he's going to be even lower than that. Going under screens, if the defense is able to go under screens, it prevents a huge amount of your action, and the biggest issue is because the defense doesn't have to respect him as a shooter, that means they also don't really have to respect him as a driver because they're going underneath anything because they're not worried about getting caught on the screen, which takes away his biggest advantage, which is his athletic ability. And then most recently in this recent NBA playoffs, we saw huge issues with players essentially being able to help off, and that was, I think, the difference in every single playoff game is the one they could help off of. If the defender is able to essentially tag the roller because he doesn't respect you as a threat, so he's all the way off over here, I think that's a major threat potentially in offense. Along with not only limiting Castle's ability, it also limits the entire team's ability if Castle's unable to shoot. But that being said, he probably has one of the biggest upside because if he's able to figure out essentially to get 7 more points on his shooting percentage, he can be a really big threat because he's already got the defense and the driving and the athletic ability. The second play we're going to talk about is Clingan. So Clingan in this game had essentially the toughest responsibility, which he had to guard the most efficient player in college basketball, which is Zach Edey. Okay? And one of the things that UConn did is guarded him one-on-one. So the fact that Clingan was able to hold his ground and be able to essentially make these shots really, really difficult shows a lot of good things for post play against NBA posts. However, the one thing to mention here, although he did a really good job, you really don't see this kind of post up that much in the NBA because their offenses don't rely on it. So even though Clingan did a really good job on defense here, I'm not sure how much that either encourages or discourages what's going to happen in the NBA. However, one of the big things that I think is really in Clingan's benefit is he's pretty athletic for a post player. And so this allows him to be more mobile and he can potentially stay in front of some guards. And this mobility puts him as even more of an impact whenever he's essentially able to play against somebody who has a mismatch because he's athletic enough to not only use his size, but to use his athleticism to essentially create an edge. And he's able to attack not very good post players or mismatches very, very effectively. And while I would never argue that he's a good shooter from the perimeter, he's certainly adequate when it comes to this little mid-range shot. He's shot a decent of them with UConn, and again, because there's a little bit of late rotation, Edey was helping off, he's got decent touch around the free throw line. However, that being said, I don't think he's going to be backing down NBA post players. He had a real tough time playing one-on-one with Zach Edey when he was the one on offense, and so I don't anticipate him just dominating down low in the post, but I do see him being a decent defender and a pretty good role player, or pretty good roller to the basket off a pick and roll. All right, so now we get to Newton. Newton, I think, is the one I would have said has the most NBA potential from the beginning of these four players. The reason I would have said Newton is because he's got a good pairing of athletic ability as well as shooting prowess. Now, he only finished the season shooting 32%, but for most of the season, he was up around 37, 38%. He was shooting very, very well, and he shoots a high volume of shots as well from the perimeter. But not only can he shoot from the perimeter, because defenses have to play close to him, he's able to use athletic ability to make good shots in the paint as well as find good passes on the perimeter. And then I love this is he instantly relocates back out to the corner. And because he's such a good shooter, that is a combination of a bunch of features I really like in that clip right there. Not only this, he was a big, essentially one of their 2 point guards besides Castle. I mean, Spencer handled a little bit too, but Newton was very comfortable with the ball. And so in the NBA, I don't see that changing very much at all. And so because of his shooting, it gave him open opportunities like this and gave the team open opportunities because you have to respect his 3 point shooting. Essentially, the defender goes too aggressively and he's able to back cut. And because UConn was a good shooting team, they modeled what you see in the NBA. And so I think back cuts like that definitely could exist for Tristen Newton. So honestly, in my eyes, I think Tristen Newton is definitely the most undervalued of all UConn's players. I think Tristen Newton has a real chance to be very, very good in the NBA. Very good. And then finally, we get to Cam Spencer. And Cam Spencer, I think, also has a very high ceiling because of the way the NBA has essentially shifted to be a much more shooting-oriented system. Spencer shot the ball unbelievably well throughout the year. 40%, 44%, something ridiculous on crazy high volume where you get caught on a screen just a little bit, he's going to make you pay. And if you think of players like Kyle Korver, players like JJ Redick, you have even more of those today. If he could just play a little bit of defense, he has a real opportunity to be an elite player as one of the role players on those teams. If we look at a player like Michael Porter Jr., I mean, Spencer essentially has this very similar shooting statistics and is maybe a little bit less athletic, but Porter Jr. doesn't play that good of defense. He doesn't drive that well. And so Spencer, I think, has a very, very clear opportunity to be an efficient NBA player and an elite NBA player potentially as well. And so then the big thing about Spencer is going to be, can he play defense against NBA players? And that's definitely going to be his weakest point. Undoubtedly, that's for sure going to be the biggest question mark because he's not the most athletic individual. However, UConn's defense, like the reason they were really good is because they played really good defense. And so his ability to anticipate rotations, his ability to stay in front of decent athletes, I think potentially does bode well and say that he could be a good NBA defender. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think he's ever going to win any awards or anything, but if he can merely be an above average or frankly an average defender and pair that with elite shooting, then he has a very good potential in the NBA. And then so walking through them again, Castle plays great defense. The biggest question mark is whether he can shoot at an NBA percentage. That's the biggest question mark. Clingan, he's going to be an elite at getting above the rim and being able to dunk it. The question is whether he can guard guards if he gets switched onto them, and then whether he's able to essentially play one-on-one against the NBA against other post players. Those are the two questions. Newton, the question is essentially whether he's going to be able to pair all of his skills and be able to essentially combine them to keep in the NBA where he can still shoot, he can still drive, and he can still be relatively athletic. And then 4 for Spencer, whether he's able to play defense, because we know he's going to be able to shoot the ball very, very well. So if you compare that with defense, he has a real chance to be very good as well. Honestly, if I was the one drafting, I would probably draft him in order. Newton, I would go first, and then I'd probably draft Spencer because you know he's going to be able to shoot, and then maybe Castle, then Clingan. But I think all 4 of them have very good possibilities, and I look forward to seeing what they do in the NBA. If you have any thoughts, feel free to leave them in a comment. But more importantly, have a blessed rest of your day.